Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of The Gavel, featuring attorney Ana Toledo. Ms. Toledo is the senior attorney and general counsel to Targeted Justice. She has a background in constitutional and environmental law and is an experienced litigator, including 2 cases at the U.S. Supreme Court. And here's Ms. Toledo.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to have you here today. One more week pushing through the information that is relevant to the end of government weaponization. I am delighted to have with me here an amazing guest that I'm going to introduce, but right after I read my Bible verse for today that I got the inspiration, and it's from Ephesians 6:10, and it's about the armor of God. And finally, be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Consistent with my mission of the Gavel, which is to bring attention to important things that are happening, important things for this community and for this nation, I'm honored to have with me as guest in the Gavel a true hero, a courageous man that wore the belt of truth buckled around his waist and the breastplate of righteousness in the armor of God. Dr. Kirk Moore is a respected 59-year-old physician and former Navy flight surgeon from Utah who faced up to 35 years in prison, not for harming patients, but for obeying his conscience and his Hippocrates oath to do no harm. With informed parental consent, he administered saline in place of COVID vaccines in children facing coercive COVID mandates. And this was for the filling out of the vaccine card that many of you know was required to lead any part of a life. So I am honored to have him here. I really believe that his example is one of the weaponization of government, thanks to Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, that brought attention, even though other, I believe, and I'll ask you about it, Thomas Massey and Mike Lee brought attention to it. It was not until Marjorie Taylor Greene stepped in that the case fortunately got dismissed after the 3rd day of trial. Welcome, Dr. Moore, and thank you for accepting the invitation to be here.
Well, Anna, listen, thank you for having me. I appreciate that. Thanks for the nice introduction.
Well, I was reading, as I mentioned to you before coming in, I was reading the January 2023 indictment where the government alleged trickery and interfering with the lawful governmental functions of the CDC. I do not understand how it is lawful governmental function of the CDC to inject a bioweapon on healthy people. But what really caught my attention is the following. Can you just give a little summary of what happened? Because I thoroughly read about it, but the people watching don't know. So can you just give a summary of it?
Yeah. So look, I don't think I was any different than most other docs in early 2020 and kind of thought that we had a real pandemic on our hands. I closed my office down in the middle of March, and within 48 hours of just doing nothing but studying and reading, I changed my mind completely. I'd done a total 180. And then at that point, I just started treating people because nobody else was. And that just continued throughout the year of 2020. Obviously, you know, everybody in the world did the same thing. You know, we're not going to get back to normal until we have a vaccine in our arms and into the arms of 8.4 billion people on the earth. And so I was still continuing to treat people. And I was just telling my patients, you know, that just don't do it. It's not safe. There's no studies on it, you know, just stay away from it. But then when in early 2021, when they started mandating things, And, spring of 21, they started telling people, well, in order to go to school, you're going to need this. In order to keep your job, you're going to need that. Have a card. And you can't get on an airplane and, without having a COVID card and everything else. I made a decision to open up a quote unquote vaccine clinic, and I gave people their cards and gave kids saline shots so that they could go to school without having getting the jab. I, by that time, completely agree with you. It was a bioweapon. And I think, my personal bias is that COVID was invented for the vaccine, not the other way around. When you look at the data, and you look at the science, there was no pandemic. There was no viral infection. The numbers at the end of January, in retrospect, showed 44 total cases worldwide with 1 death. I don't know how that qualifies as a worldwide pandemic, but they just use, fear propaganda and fear mongering to convince everybody that they were going to die. And so they know what the, psychological studies will do to people. And they just ran that experiment. They ran the Milgram experiment on everybody on the face of the earth. And they know that when you get somebody to do one thing, 92% of them will do the next step that you ask them to do. So it was, definitely something that I made a decision about. And I got in trouble, like you said, even very briefly, January 23, we were indicted for, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and counterfeiting. In January of 25, 2 years later, they had to do a superseding indictment, and they added a charge of tampering with evidence and destruction of government property because they claimed that I had thrown away the vaccine after the indictment, or I had instructed one of my employees to throw away the vaccine after the indictment. So therefore, that's tampering with evidence. That kind of went through, and, trial started in July of this year. And the grace of God got Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, Mike Lee, finally got the attention of Attorney General Bondi, and she dismissed my case mid-trial. She dismissed it actually mid-prosecution, which is, as far as I know, has never happened before. But I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a historian, but I've never been able to find another case that was dismissed in the middle of the prosecution's case presentation. So that's where
when you say that in January of 2025, they did a superseding indictment, was that before or after President Trump swore in as president?
That was afterwards. So no, they did the superseding indictment before Trump was sworn in. They wanted to do that. They set that date for, I think it was January 11th. So yeah, they purposely did that before the swearing-in process. Yes.
So nobody complained against you. There was no formal complaint by a person. How did the case begin? Because I assume that none of your very happy patients complained against you. How did it start?
So the story that we got, and the story according to what evidence was presented to us, is I had a patient that came in that was completely anti-vax and told her office and staff and everybody there that she was never going to get a vaccine. And then she found out about our clinic, came in, got a card. And then when she went back to her HR department and showed the card, the people there at the HR department were skeptical that she had done anything. And so they called the Utah Health Department and said, I think there might be something funny going on with this, with this clinic. And then they ran a sting operation on me twice and had 2 people come in and get a COVID card without a shot.
So that they were like plants, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now here's what was really weird for me. And I'm going to show you a clip that is one of the hundreds or thousands. Okay. This is very short. Let me see if I can put it there.
I don't know.
Patrick Sean.
We are now seeing prostate cancer in 40 and 50-year-old people.
Yeah. So Japan is very advanced in. So here's what I saw. The indictment was dated in January of 23, dating back to events that happened between May of 21 and September of 22. Okay. And then what happens is that in all of 2022, in fact, as early as 2021, May and April of 2021, they started saying reports about myocarditis and pericarditis, and also after between March and April 2021, that the bioweapon was associated to thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome and Guillain-Barré syndrome. So all of this had been already exposed way before January of 2023.
Right.
Did you see anything weird about in January 2023 getting indicted for something that the medical community was already, there was a consensus of how poisonous it was for people?
Well, no, I don't. Again, we briefly talked about this, Anna, before. The government's not looking for the truth. Okay. And they're just, it's about winning, and it's about trying to, force people into compliance and to coerce them to do something that you want them to do. So they were not interested in finding out. As a matter of fact, they did everything that they could, and actually, won a lot of motions to actually preclude us from really even talking about COVID. I mean, it was kind of like that. They had us going down this narrow road that was basically, hey, here's a contract. He said he was going to do this. Doesn't really matter what the contract is. Doesn't matter what the terms are. But this is the contract that he signed. We told him he needed to do this. He didn't do that. And therefore, that's fraud. And they wanted to avoid almost any discussion of COVID and any discussions of any, they certainly weren't going to discuss any of the reasons why anybody came in to see us instead, or any of the reasons, or any of the risks or complications that was happening afterwards, or discuss any of the data that had been subsequently exposed. Look, 700 people were reported to VAERS in January of 2021 alone, as far as deaths. 700 in the first 30 days. Okay, so that everybody knew what this was, and they're hiding it. I've used this term a lot. When after the vSafe data came out, I think, which was in early 23, and they showed that 31% of the patients that voluntarily, kind of offered to give their own historical perspective, or their own kind of ongoing perspective of what the complications were and everything else with the vaccine, 31% of them had complications that required them either to go to the emergency room or required them not to be able to go to work. So that's out of 10 million people. So they had, over 3 million people that couldn't work the next day, couldn't work for a while, or went to the emergency room or an urgent care center because of the complications that they sustained from the shot.
Have you see here at Targeted Justice, one of the things that we have a lot of people tell us is, you saved our life, you saved my life. And I wonder, do you ever ponder how many lives you saved by being so courageous and just injecting saline solution into kids and people? Was it 19?
So 1,937 people were uploaded to the Utah State Immunization Information System. Actually, Dr. Jim Thorpe ran those numbers using Pfizer's own data. And based on Pfizer's own data, he says that I saved 8.4 lives and prevented 280 people from having severe adverse events. Dr. Margaret Aranda took that even further and said, well, because he kept those vaccines from being used on those other patients, he actually doubled those lives, because he saved the ones that didn't get it, and then he saved the ones from actually, other people injecting them into that. So I'll leave the stats to other people and the discussions. I just look, and I did what was right. I did what I felt was right. I did what I felt was good for my patients. I wasn't advertising it. I'm not going out trying to solicit patients to come to me. They were all coming to me word of mouth. It wasn't even on my website. It wasn't anything out there. It was just people finding out that, what it was that we were doing. I didn't keep other people from getting the vaccines. Over 2 million doses of the vaccines were thrown out in the state of Utah in January of 23 alone. 2 million doses. The United States threw away and tossed, because they either expired or went unused, over 3 100 million doses of this vaccine. Okay.
After paying for them.
Of course, and they paid for them up front, right? I mean, pharma, and I don't even call them pharma, they're big pharma to me. They profited exponentially on the backs of the federal, government, on the backs of the, of the U.S. population, and, made money hand over fist, polluting and poisoning and murdering and maiming, society. And they're going after me for what they perceived was $28,800 worth of quote unquote fraud. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's an unequal application of the law. I want to show you something that is like really, really funny. Back in Puerto Rico, they found here, let me just put this here, on the edge of a road, on the side of a road, they found these, the Walgreens driver was driving, and he took a curve that was too close, and the vaccines just fell off to the street, and they just left them there, and that guy never got prosecuted. And right. it's the difference in the application of the law. What you just mentioned about throwing away 3 million doses. How can they come after you? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, look, they can, Anna, they can go after anybody, and that. I mean, that's what your show is all about. They just they pick and choose who they're going to go after. They spent millions of dollars prosecuting me over $28,000 of presumed $28,000 worth of product. When it came to trial, they were so scared of trying to present data to support even how much the government paid for these vaccines that they didn't even introduce a contract to show how much they paid for it, because it was redacted, and they couldn't produce the contract. They had the head of BARDA, Gary Disbrow, fly all the way across the country and be one of the witnesses for them, and they didn't even give him any exhibits to talk about, because the only exhibit that they had was a contract that he was intimately familiar with because he negotiated it. But ASPR and BARDA itself and the DOD refused to let that contract be presented at my trial. So they couldn't show how much they paid for it, because there was other things in that contract that they just did not want out in the public. So, this thing is just nothing but a farce. It's nothing but a fake pandemic. And they're just, they didn't want to get caught anymore with their pants down, essentially, is what was going on. Well,
I think that, like you say, the government will go after you because they're almighty, but there is the big pharma industry pressuring, because they own the FDA, they own the CDC, they own pretty much a lot of politicians. And that's what is the moving force behind, the pressure, because I know of a lot of people that have been harmed, personally harmed in terms of, oh God, what happened here? Are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, there we go.
This is what happens. I know you said we were going to talk about it. This is exactly what it does. This is what happens.
Yeah, they love are we still recording? I hope we are. Yes, we are recording.
Yeah, it says recording. We're still
okay. So I'm going to put something in stage, because I wanted to ask you if you were aware of this. You see, this is the good thing. You know what triggers them, because they immediately let you know what triggers them.
Right.
So let me just show you this. This is Tulsi Gabbard declassified these documents about a month and a half ago. And I don't know if you were aware of a fact that anybody domestic violent extremists, that's what DVE is. And their foreign analogs might exploit planned demonstrations to overturn or attack state and federal buildings and incite violence. Imagine, as if we didn't know what is legal and what is not, right? We're just about individual rights. So were you aware that people like you could have been classified as a domestic violent extremist?
No, I did not know that. I had not seen that. I knew that, Tulsi Gabbard declassified a lot of documents, but I was not aware of these particular documents. I know that they, used, again, lawfare that got overturned eventually in the Supreme Court, trying to add a terrorism charge to the January 6th defendants. But, no, this was never discussed on our end. I don't know. I would not be surprised if we were to find out through some sort of internal documents about my case as to whether, the prosecutors were thinking about trying to enhance the charges against me, with this, domestic violence, exacerbate or with domestic violence extremism charge. So,
well, this was dated December 2021. So I think it would be safe to assume that you were, along many other people that were vehement opposers to mandates and to what they were doing to humanity, that you'd be on this list. And I am on that list too. And I am a law-abiding attorney. And so the reason I asked you about this is because you had the right to the Brady materials, right?
Yeah.
And so by the time you face trial, they were supposed to have produced to you evidence that it's likely in what Margot Cleveland, the journalist, has unveiled through Chuck Grassley, Senator George Chuck Grassley from Iowa, are the prohibited access files from the FBI, which nobody had access to them except the people that have access to this program. So I just throw this out there because, like you say, it's something that when this gets exposed, because we have no doubt it's going to get exposed, maybe this is the source of your indictment.
Well, look, I completely agree with you. If there was any information, and this is what one of the arguments was, my attorneys did see the contract. It was an attorney's only disclosure. What I was saying is, hey, if there's information in there that is what's the term you just used it, that is exculpatory towards what it is that I did, or it proves that there was, a fraudulent means or a fraudulent mechanism behind what it was that they were doing, and they don't disclose that to me, then that's a Brady violation, and then my case goes away. I think that was part of the reason why the prosecution, kind of decided, to not take this to not want to go down the route with, all of the COVID stuff and everything else, and why they were pushing so hard to keep any discussion of COVID or anything almost out of the trial. Like I said, they just wanted you signed a contract to do this, you didn't do this, and therefore we gave you this to do this. And, they just wanted this to be just a generic term as opposed to talking about, COVID and the vaccines and the jabs and, and all of that stuff. So they worked really, really hard to make that happen. In large measure, they were successful until we got the trial.
How I saw your docket and it has 390 entries. And as an attorney, I can only fathom the emotional load and the economic load that this represented for you, and knowing that you were wrongly accused. Can you shed a little bit of light as to how harrowing this process was for you at a personal level?
Well, Anna, I'll tell you, it obviously added a lot of stress to this, to my life. Okay. It took my, it took my focus away from my business, took my focus away from my family, in some ways. I mean, it actually caused me to focus more on my family to some degree, just because it made me realize how important they are. Not that I didn't know how important, but the fact that, that you're facing, up to 35 years in jail, you're essentially, that's the rest of my life. I won't be there for my kids' graduation, I won't be there for my, the marriage of my daughter, any grandkids, those kinds of things that, obviously takes a huge toll. and just trying to kind of just conduct day-to-day life. I mean, I've gained 25 pounds. I'm typically a very healthy person, and exercise. I haven't been to the gym in almost 3 years. Actually, probably a little bit more than 3 years. Just I've got to get back into that routine. It's just been a change. And then the financial toll. I mean, I sold almost everything that I had. My house was about to go on the market to just cover my legal expenses. I couldn't, didn't have the bandwidth to kind of continue to run my practice. I was, had some real significant help in terms of my staff kind of coming through and, making sure that we made ends meet as best as possible and, cutting all the corners. And as a plastic surgeon, the marketing is a requirement. Okay. And so all my marketing budget went to my attorneys and legal expenses and legal fees and travel and, those kinds of things to try to get the word out about what it was that we were going through. So it's been, that's, thank you. It's a new branded name that we have been working on, kind of hoping that I was going to be either acquitted or not convicted. Obviously dismissed is even better. So we've rebranded in the name of Freedom. So Freedom Surgical Anesthetics. Absolutely. Thank you for putting that up.
Yeah. Well, look, I know a lot of people that need courageous physicians and surgeons. And, obviously that's why I'm putting it out there, because not many people have your courage. And so I really hope that you have a lot of prosperity, because more people like you need to be prosperous, people that dare challenge the system and dare put the truth out there. Because you see, one of my sayings is that courage is a trait in danger of extinction. People are scared of being courageous, and that's certainly something we need more of. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it there because people need to know that this is an amazing, very experienced surgeon in Utah who is also very courageous. So for those of you that need it, write it down. I wanted to ask you about did you hear also there was in Texas a surgeon, children's surgeon, Dr. Haim.
Dr. Haim, Eitan Haim.
Yeah, and he faced similar to you,
right,
for being a whistleblower. And in his case, they stopped the proceeding. I think it was the day before the case started. They didn't actually start like in your case. Now, do you know what took so long to stop, to capture the attention of DOJ and stop this madness?
I don't. When there was, on Friday, I think his case was dismissed either Thursday or Friday. The day before that, I had done a podcast with Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, and she posted that podcast. And then the very same day, he got, Dr. Haim got his case dismissed, and I would have bet you dollars to donuts that my case was next. But that didn't happen. There were people in DOJ that knew about my case. Okay. A lot of people in DOJ and DC. So, and for whatever reason, they didn't intervene. As a matter of fact, we were turned down from any intervention by the weaponization work group in April of this year. So the weaponization work group that Donald Trump established I believe it was with an executive order within the first day or two of his office, and then Pam Bondi actually putting the committee together. We knew what that was, and so we submitted a packet of information to them, and we had communication with them during that whole time. And then in late April, they decided that they weren't going to intervene. They sent us an email and said, "I'm sorry, we've decided to not intervene in this case." Pam Bondi says that she never knew about that it didn't make it to her desk. But I'm pretty sure that it made it to the desk of Todd Blanche, because his chief of staff was the one that we were communicating with, and I believe that he's the one that communicated with us. So it was pretty high up in DOJ, and we were turned down initially. Pam Bondi says she didn't know about it, was made aware of it by Marjorie Taylor Greene, Mike Lee, and Thomas Massey. She credits Marjorie Taylor Greene for her persistence and perseverance to, kind of get this case on her desk. And she dismissed the case on, Saturday morning. It was 8:30 my time, but I don't know what the date was or what the time was and when she made that decision, but that's what happened.
Yeah, well, look, the most important thing is it's over. The nightmare is over. Maybe some people should have done some things, and I tell you, I am hopeful that the weaponization committee does what it's supposed to do, because there is a lot of things that are happening that they say, no, that's none of our business, and let me just show you, because I think you have, I don't have it here. You also have a Gifts and Go going, right? They just have to look it up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's Gifts and Go / Fight for More. So the number 4, so fight, and then FIGHT 4, the number 4, and then more, MOORE. Obviously anything is appreciated. We spend a lot of money on legal fees, and and all the opportunity costs of lost business and everything else has been a huge draw on myself and on Chris Anderson. So any contributions would be certainly helpful. Thank you.
Well, also, I want to ask you, I see that in Utah, contrary to what happens in Washington State and California, in Utah, the medical licensing board didn't come after you, right?
No, they did not.
And because the way I see it, I think that, Utah is preparing for this interview. I learned that it's 73% Christian. So it's the highest in all the nation. It's the highest jurisdiction, and that they have prohibited the gender change of children, and they have prohibited LGBTQ banners in the schools. So it's very conservative in this sense. I think that, in fact, I also saw how the Sundance Festival was moved to Boulder, Colorado, and I have no doubt that that's the reason why it happened. So you are very fortunate in that sense that at least the medical licensing board, because you didn't commit any ethical violation to your profession, right?
No, I mean, again, my personal position during this whole time is the only law that was violated were the HIPAA laws. The only federal laws that were violated were HIPAA laws. Forcing people to disclose their medical information, or people asking you for your medical information, is actually a violation of federal law. There are no federal laws that require me to inject somebody with a bioweapon. And in spite of a contract that they try to get me, or it's not even a contract because they didn't sign, nobody signed it on the other side. So the agreement that they claim was a contract, saying that I didn't do what they asked me to do, there were no laws. There were no legislative laws that were passed, nothing signed by the government, nothing signed by the president, nothing signed in any of the states, as a matter of fact. So it's, the only federal law here that was violated was, were the HIPAA laws. And you mentioned this earlier, in the indictment over and over and over again, and during the hearings and during the motions, the prosecution made a big case of the lawful governmental functions of the CDC. Well, the CDC has no lawful governmental function. They are an advisory agency only. They are, they're supposed to give recommendations to their 64 jurisdictions, and that's it. That's all they have the right to do. Now, whether the jurisdictions happen to take those recommendations or not is really up to them. What's happened over the last 50 years, though, is that these recommendations have kind of been morphed into thinking that, hey, whatever the CDC comes out with, we have to do it. And I don't know whether there's been federal dollars and federal monies that have been attached to those. So if you don't do what you say we're going to do, then we're not going to cover the costs for, these vaccines, or we're not going to give you money for this, or we're going to take money away from you for not having done that, or whatever it is. There's probably some, financial incentive or some financial punishments behind not doing what it is that they tell you to do. But the true reality is the CDC does not have any lawful governmental functions. So it's kind of it's an oxymoron that they put in there in my indictment over and over and over again. And that's what we tried to get the CDC. Chris Duggar was, a CDC director and head of the CDC COVID task force. And we asked him, what the lawful functions of the CDC were, and he couldn't tell us because there are none. So it was an interesting discussion.
Well, and you also have that they are not even paying attention to the things they need to be paying attention to, like, for example, Havana syndrome in civilian population. Right. One of the things that anybody that believes is on this illegal list, because it's illegal, because they are putting people on this list without reasonable suspicion, is to cup your ears in a very quiet place. And if after 45 seconds you start hearing microwave pops, is the tracking the microwaves from the cell towers. And what's happening is that Dr. Michael Hoffer, who is the authority on Havana syndrome that diagnosed the original patients from the Cuba embassy, well, he has been prohibited from diagnosing any more Havana syndromes. And I believe it's a silent epidemic happening in this nation, and there's more to come on that. But certainly, standing up to this humongous thing is just a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing. And again, I really commend you, because I saw how people not only were willing to just vaccinate people, but they went along with it. People are falling, at least back home in Puerto Rico, they're falling like flies. People are just dying just like that, and it's really horrible, because unlike the United States, they did not have access to alternative media telling them about what was, the studies and everything. So,
well, they tried to shut us down too, and they were very, successful in a lot of ways. Fortunately, we have lots of other means, and many people were still able to get their, messages out, and thank God for that, because that's what saved me, in the sense of, kind of being able to find people out there that were actually trying to tell the truth, and were telling the truth. And so therefore, we were able to continue that. Dr. Vladimir Zelenko is the first one that I remember, with Dr. Tyson and George Fareed out in California, Peter McCullough, Pierre Corey, and Paul Merrick, all of those people with the FLCCC, Simone Gold, America's Frontline Doctors, all of those people that were involved in those organizations were able to, in spite of all the censorship and shutdown and everything else, we're still able to get some information out. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough, and we still have, what they claim are 2/3 or 3/4 of the population that have been injected with at least one shot. I think those numbers are a lot smaller than that. I certainly hope so. But there was just a study that was just published a month or so ago, 3-4 weeks ago, that showed that the United States life expectancy has diminished or has decreased by 30 years. 30, okay, 29.6 years. And so that means that we went from nearly 80 years old as a life expectancy for a kid born in 2019, 2020, to now that, they're only expected to live until, they're about 50. If you're 30 years old in the United States and you've had 2 COVID shots, then your life expectancy isn't to be, to live much past the age of 55. So that's scary.
One of the things that, I was like you, I was in super shape before COVID and going to the gym and everything. But now I heard Mike Adams says something really important, and it is that we have the problem of shedding, that the people that did get vaccinated are shedding all over the place. And so you can get the effects of having been vaccinated by being around somebody who did get vaccinated. So,
right. And they're putting it in the food. They're spraying it in the air. They're figuring out other ways of doing it. There's mRNA, lipid nanoparticle vaccines that are now nasal sprays that they're trying to get approved. So if they can put it in a nasal spray in a little bottle and you buy it over the counter or buy it, through a pharmacy and just get it delivered to you or whatever, you can't imagine that they're not putting it in those airplanes that are flying overhead and the geoengineering products that they're spraying on us, along with all the aluminum and toxic chemicals that they're putting in there to keep us from going into a mass global warming catastrophe. So
absolutely. And as I don't know if you know, but Dr. David Nixon, Dr. Lendner, they have exposed how all dental anesthetics sold in the United States contain self-assembling nanotechnology that is very close to the brain. So it's just there's too many things that the human body is being attacked with. And
Dr. David Nixon came by my office just last week or 2 weeks ago. He's actually in the United States right now. Went to a conference down in New Mexico. I was honored to meet him, and he's done a lot to expose, a lot of the nefarious and evil products that we have in almost all of our medical products nowadays.
Well, but then I think that, and I hope RFK that this was one idea he was throwing around, which is that pharmaceutical products need to be produced in the United States and, supervised here, and not, because the fact that they all have self-assembling nanotechnology, that should have been taken care of by now. It's been 6 months into the administration. How come they are not addressing this emergency?
I think, I think you mentioned this earlier too, the effect and the influence that Big Pharma has over our whole governmental structure and institutions is not just limited to, FDA and CDC. It's to control our politicians. I think Donald Trump took $2 million for his inauguration from from Pfizer. His chief of staff is the ex-chief legal counsel for Pfizer. So there's just a lot of influential people that they have their hands on. They spend more money on lobbying and marketing and everything else than any other industry in our world. And they control the education, they control the physicians. They control the medical boards, they control the medical journals. So it's all corrupted from top to bottom. And, I don't know how to eliminate that, that level of corruption and that level of influence.
Well, I just wanted to put this back on stage for those that didn't get it before. Dr. Moore is in Utah. And I've never been there. I would love to go there. And when I get back to skiing one day, hopefully, and that I absolutely, I love skiing because skiing for me is a reflection of life. You just have to make sure you don't take down the person in front of you. You don't have to be looking back. But now, after having gone through the targeting and everything, I realized, you have to be looking who's coming down, because they might bring you down. But anyways, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna go into a little announcement I normally discuss the news about the weaponization of the government and how we're going to end it. Unfortunately,
I hope so. I mean, I had a lot of hope with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. I think they're still trying. I don't think, and I still think that RFK is trying. You don't spend 25 or 30 years of your life to go into this position, which is where he wanted to be, I believe, and then just throw it all out the door. So I think he's trying to do what he can within the system without getting fired and without getting terminated, and or maybe without even getting killed or getting his family hurt. So
There you go.
I just don't see. I know he knows what's going on. I know he understands what's going on. I know Dan Bongino knows what's going on. Kash Patel all know what's going on. And yes, it's frustrating on the outside looking at, why are we talking about, drug busts coming from, ships that are coming across from Cuba or, across the, Caribbean, as opposed to, figuring out what the corruption is within our government and arresting the people that have been doing this for the last 50 years. So we may get there. I still hold out hope that we do. And I just think we just need to have more people that do what's right and do what they know they need to do. So.
Yeah, well, I am in the purpose of this program is precisely because of that hope, because we hope that justice and truth is going to prevail. And in your case, it did prevail, even if it took a little extra effort from Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right.
And that's what we are all looking forward to, that there are these moments of justice that just spontaneous come out of nowhere and happen, because otherwise this fight is not worth fighting, but I am encouraged by what I'm seeing, the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is declassifying a lot of information. I think she's a hero. And I think, yeah, and you will see that when this all gets exposed, if your name was there, you might go down that rabbit hole that's why your case got filed, because of this nefarious list that places innocent law-abiding Americans on what is called the terrorist screening database. 97% of it is people that do not represent a threat to national security. However, and they don't get screened as such when they travel. However, their lives are made very hard, very difficult. You get a lot of hacking. You get a lot of, listening into your conversations, and other personal things that are not, that are not supposed to happen. But it's like, it was bad luck. Okay. And for the rest of the people, I'm just going to conclude it because I normally do a half-hour show. So I just want to tell everybody, and let me put this here. Some people might think this is a bad thing happening in the United States, in DC. I say it's not, because we're having the activity Targeted Action 2025 from the 5th to the 9th of September. And I think this is the best thing that Donald Trump could have done, because it's going to ensure that, or at least make it safer for everybody visiting DC. They have a month to put everything together, and I think it's just a great thing. So please sign up in Targeted Action, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Moore. Do you have anything to add before we say goodbye?
No, thanks for having me, Anna. I would say, look, we just have to stop thinking that the government has our best interests. We have to start taking control of our own lives. And you have to live by the motto of nobody looks out for you like you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And be vigilant, but also to not back off. Right. If you had chosen to do a plea agreement and God knows what, and not just pushed through with your courage because you knew you were right, then, you wouldn't have been as successful as you are today. And that's what people need to see, that it doesn't pay off to act out of fear. One must act out of courage and out of love, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll see you, everybody, next week. We're going to have tons of news because a lot of good things are happening. And I do hope that we are going to end the government weaponization of law-abiding Americans and people around the world. Thank you so much.